the average person, I think, has no idea how much lying goes on and how able they are to spot that. So how much do people lie?
Well, we lie a lot. I mean, some studies say we lie up to 200 times a day. Some studies say we lie only 5 times a day. The way I break it up is there are high stakes lies and low stakes lies. And so we navigate social dignity all day long with white lies. Honey, you don't look fat in that. That's okay. Or, oh, I'm sorry, I just fished that email out of my spam folder. Not a problem. The high stakes lies are less common, but they're very high stakes and they're significant. So lies like, that affect maybe who to marry or what house to buy or who to go to work with and so forth. Those are very high stakes lies that we have to really avoid.
Is there a list of things that cause people to lie? Because you say people lie, you say as many as 200 times a day. What are the motivators? What cause people to lie?
First of all, everyone lies. And so it's really important to understand what motivates someone to lie. If you want to get to the truth, you have to understand their motivation. For the most part, we lie to avoid conflict. We lie sometimes to manipulate someone, to have power over someone. We lie to gain the admiration of others. We lie oftentimes to protect privacy. So not all lies are necessarily for terrible reasons. There are times when somebody will lie simply to gain power over another person or to manipulate the situation, but they're kind of offensive and defensive lies, and not all of them are terrible.
One of the things that I have focused on from a psychological standpoint is empathy, warmth, and genuineness.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difference between being genuine and being cruel. Like, for example, let's say a guy goes up to a girl in a club and says, "Would you like to dance?" She can say, "No." That's genuine. She doesn't want to dance. Or she could give a fulsome answer and say, "I wouldn't dance with you in 100 years if you were the last man on earth. You smell funny. You look funny. I would drop dead first." That's also the truth. But is that a lie by omission to leave all of that out?
No, not at all. I mean, you're having a dinner party and the one person who sucks all the air out of the room and dominates the whole thing calls you up and says, "I heard you having a dinner party. Oh, I'm so sorry. I must have the wrong email address." You still got to probably invite them to the dinner party.
Yeah.
So there's social dignity and there's appropriate boundaries in the world. And honestly, a lot of people use the excuse of authenticity as a way to act in very aggressive ways towards each other. And I don't think it's helpful to anybody.
Yeah, that's an interesting term, social dignity. What do you mean by that?
Well, everyone's trying to make their way in the world, and we all make mistakes, and we all have conflicts. And it's a complicated world, and sometimes you have a bad day, sometimes you have a good day. It's sort of like driving on the highway. You have to kind of navigate around the challenges. And oftentimes that requires a slight bit of fabrication in order to do that.
Yeah. It does help people's feelings, right? You're protecting their feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I get it. I've been bald since I was 12. I read a study the other day that said 78% of men would cut a body part off rather than be bald. And I have people say, "Oh, listen, I get being bald. That wouldn't bother me at all." I'm thinking, no, I read a study that said 78% of you would cut something off before you would be bald. Yeah, no, don't lie to me. Now, I wrote down some of the things that you said that I have quoted so many times, and I've just been dying to ask you about these things. You say men lie 8 times more about themselves, whereas women lie to protect others.
Yeah, there's some science around that. I mean, men, you've just met somebody, they were on Match.com or a dating service, you're on your first date. He says, "Oh yeah, I was VP of sales at that company." Well, he may have been director of sales or manager of sales. They oftentimes do it for position. They're kind of, they're viewing themselves as, or presenting themselves a little bit higher up than they really were. Women oftentimes will protect other people's feelings and they'll try to avoid conflict. But we do lie with equal frequency.
And when people lie on resumes and that sort of thing, where they kind of fluff things up, do people expect to get caught, or do you think they're going to get away with it?
So this is an interesting question. There's a small percentage of people for whom you have the "what were you thinking" question. Like, of course, you're a C-suite executive. You're going to go through an executive search firm. Why on earth did you say you were CFO when you weren't?
Yeah.
So that's a small percentage of people where there's really a disconnect between reality and what one could expect. For the most part, though, I think people just fabricate a little bit to boost themselves up a little bit. You know, one study was done where they looked, I think it was Career Builder who did the study. They looked at fabrication in resumes. And do you know what one of the most common resume lies was? Claiming to be a member of the Kennedy family.
You're
kidding. No. So,
I
mean, what were they thinking?
Why would you want to be a member of the Kennedy family?
Exactly.
Let's think
well,
Chappaquiddick. Let's think,
well, you get the interview.
Yeah. I always hear people say, particularly to their teenagers, why do you lie? You never get away with it. Isn't the truth that they get away with it most of the time? People don't lie if they're not getting away with it, right?
That's true, but particularly with teenagers, and you know this, of course, from your show, we do so much to avoid embarrassment. We will go to such lengths to avoid being confronted, and particularly now when we live in a digital world where people aren't used to being confronted in person. We'll go to any length.
There's a saying in Texas, for every rat you see, there's 50 you don't. The number one predictor of future behavior is not some psychological test. It's not an MMPI. It's not a Rorschach. It's not any of those tests. I always had people asking me the question, and I would say, look, if you want to know if this candidate's going to steal from you, the best thing you can do is get a really good history. If they stole from the last person they worked for, that's the best predictor of whether they're going to steal from you or not some test. I always talk to people, and if they're lying to me about one thing or two things or three things, I always assume there's 50 things I'm not seeing that they're lying about. I just don't understand why people assume that the only lie they catch them in is the only lie they've told.
Well, you know, it even goes deeper than that, because there's studies out there that show that people who start cheating in high school are much more likely to be fraudulent later on in life.
Really?
So we have to get it earlier and earlier and earlier. You're absolutely right. I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire usually.
Yeah, I always think sometimes that parents teach their kids to lie because they put them in a position that they have to lie. It's like, you're going to tell me what I want to hear, or your whole world's going to turn to hell. So they teach them to tell them what they want to hear. And so they've learned, okay, I can avoid accountability if I'll tell you a white lie. And then it goes with them from there on. Now, with what accuracy can you spot a lie? If you're really trained in this, somebody you yourself or somebody you've trained to really look for the clusters, with what accuracy can you spot if somebody is truly weaving a story?
So we know that with training, someone who's at like 54% accurate can actually get to about 90% accurate if they're trained well. But I don't recommend that. I actually think even if you're the best human lie detector on earth, you should still be combining that with getting your facts and really confirming sources, going back to original sources, doing your research, talking to everybody that you can. Because the last thing you want to do is make the wrong assumption.
Right.
So, but you can get pretty accurate. I mean, you can learn to observe facial microexpressions, look at people's verbal and nonverbal expressions, raise the cognitive load, as we say, on someone as you're asking them a hard question, so that they start to show those tells a little bit more extensively.
So what can people use to spot a lie if they're talking to a salesman, if they're talking to a coworker, God forbid they're suspicious of their spouse? What are the tells? What do they look for to see if somebody's really lying?
Well, first of all, if it's someone they're working with, they're starting out in the right place, because you have to, as you know, baseline someone first. You got to get, how are you? How was your weekend? Did you go shopping? What are you doing? You got to get a sense of their vocal tone, the cadence of their voice, their posture, their physical gestures. So you have to get someone's norm so you have a reliable reference point for measuring it later. So you always baseline someone, you get the norm first, if it's a salesman or if it's someone that you don't know. If it's someone you know well, you know their baseline. You even know their go-to phrase when they lie.
Right.
But beyond that, there are two ways to do it. One is to ask a whole bunch of open-ended questions. Don't threaten the person at all, and just let them start talking. And you can observe verbal and nonverbal indicators. Clearly on the verbal side, the ones that we're most familiar with that you hear all the time are when someone says, you know, to tell you the truth, in all honesty, this house I'm trying to sell you, did the basement flood? Let me think about that one more time. Repeating the question. No, it didn't flood. Okay, you're not buying that house.
Yeah.
And so if someone's repeating the question, offering up qualifying language, using perhaps what we say, distancing language, like saying it, like Bill Clinton said, I didn't have sex with that woman, Miss
Right.
Lewinsky. Narrowing the field a little bit. I didn't take 20 from that drawer, not, hey, I never stole anything in my life. Using maybe soft replacement language. Oftentimes, when law enforcement interviews a potential rapist, he's going to say, I didn't touch that woman, not I didn't rape that woman. They use soft replacement language. Normally, though, what I find most effective on the verbal side, because all that's pretty hard to track if you're living out in the middle of, you're doing your job every day and you're busy. And I don't know if that was distancing language or not. That's pretty
Right.
hard to track. Here's the shortcut. Did the person across the table from you that you're asking questions of just subtly shift from very cooperatively providing you with information to what we call convince mode? Are they all of a sudden starting to try to persuade you of their truthfulness, bolster their character in some way? But I'm a good person. I went to a good school. I'm honest. I go to church every Sunday. When they try to bolster their character and they're starting to plead and convince you. And before that, they were just providing you with information. That's a pretty good flashing yellow light.
Yeah, they start making convincing statements.
Exactly.
Everybody will tell you,
Right.
I give more money than was stolen. I donate more money than was taken.
Exactly. I say, forget all those indicators. You do need to find 2 or 3 on the verbal side, 2 or 3 on the nonverbal side. But throw all that out for a minute and ask yourself, is that person just trying to convince you? Are they starting to plead more and more desperately? That's a red light.
Is it an indicator that you look at if you ask them, what do you think should happen to a person that's done this, if they mitigate the consequences?
Very much so. So there are a bunch of questions you can ask that are kind of telltale questions that'll provoke somebody and they'll help you get to the truth. And if you say, what should happen to whoever deflated those footballs, Tom Brady?
Yeah.
Okay. If you say, what should happen to whoever stole that computer? The guilty person's going to say, I don't know. It's not my job to say. They're going to look down. Maybe probation. I don't know. The honest person's going to say, you kidding? Kick them out of the game. Fire them. Bring in law enforcement. Let's get to the truth. So strict punishment is typically recommended by the truthful person.
Yeah. And if they're guilty, they're going to say, well, they're going to, waffle around.
It's actually interesting because when you think about lying, the reason we're really bad lie detectors is because we don't usually find out if someone lied, or we don't find out until much later. So we have a learning curve problem. It's not like tennis where you serve a ball and you get instant feedback, the ball went out of the court. It's probably the same thing if you're a blackout drunk, right? You don't know what you didn't know.
Yeah.
You don't know what may have happened. So if you are, and I'm not accusing of being a blackout drunk or even a fragmented blackout drunk, but I'm saying if you happen to be a fragmented or a blackout drunk, there are probably lots of times where no one ever told you you blacked out and you don't know you did. So it's complicated.
Well, should people, should parents, should small business owners go to the trouble to try to learn at least the rudimentary skills of lie detection, lie spotting?
I think they should, and I'll tell you why. It's not like we're going to run out and we're going to go, liar, liar, pants on fire. Let's point the finger at everybody out there. But think about it. You study piano, you study clarinet, you study violin, and what happens? You develop a much greater appreciation for music. You study lying and you start to understand it. It imparts in you an appreciation for who to trust. And that's significant, and it can really change your life. If you really start to think through, where should your relationships be? Who's important to trust? How do you want to build the infrastructure of trust around you? That's significant. So it's really not about learning the tells. It's really about thinking through what role is trust going to play in your life and how you're going to create that circle of trust around you that's going to give you the support that you need.